Thursday, July 7th, and Highland Park might not have been the only target. We start here. Police say we narrowly missed multiple mass shootings at 4th of July celebrations.
He heads across state lines, he's thinking about it, then he turns back around, ditches his phone.
Our chief investigative reporter breaks down what we've learned. Meanwhile, the investigation around January 6th will now include testimony from the White House's top lawyer.
He was one of the only aides with Trump on January 6th.
What will he say when he goes under oath? And they were charged so much in property tax they had to give up their homes.
So you couldn't afford $6,000?
No, that might as well have been $6 million.
Now Detroit is admitting it overcharged, but still won't give them their money back. From ABC News, this is Start Here. I'm Brad Milkey. The mass shooting at a 4th of July celebration in Highland Park, Illinois was terrible all by itself. 7 people dead, dozens more injured from ammunition that is built to cause terrible damage to the body.
It's a very scary thought just to think about the community and our house of being somewhere that you don't feel safe right now.
But what made it even more upsetting, both to people around the country and even people who were there suffering through it, was that this very accurately fit the picture of modern America.
This should not be okay. There's something very wrong with us where we are numb to this. This is not okay. We need to change.
This could happen anywhere, and almost to prove it, it wasn't even the only shooting of the day. Well, yesterday, back in Highland Park, investigators say they got a confession from their prime suspect.
He was read his Miranda warnings, offered attorneys, etc. He went into details about what he had done. He admitted to what he had done.
And as part of that confession, they said they learned he not only could have struck somewhere else, but he almost did. Let's go to ABC's chief investigative reporter, Josh Margolin. Josh, what have law enforcement been describing to you? You guys kind of got on this story first.
Yeah, well, Brad, we found out pretty much as soon as they brought him in to get questioned after they arrested him on the 4th of July that he was making statements that amounted to an admission of responsibility or a confession. And now law enforcement, after yesterday's court appearance, said that they learned from the suspected shooter that not only was he taking responsibility for what they allege he did in the shooting in Highland Park, but that he went over state lines with another rifle and 60 rounds on him, and he was actually contemplating another shooting in Madison, Wisconsin.
Wow.
It appears when he drove to Madison, he was driving around. However, he did see a celebration that was occurring in Madison, and he seriously contemplated using the firearm he had in his vehicle to commit another shooting in Madison.
Law enforcement is saying that he did not seem to put in the weeks of pre-planning with the Madison, Wisconsin possibility, the way that he did with Highland Park. And they said they don't really know what he was thinking, what he was going to do, what his plan would have been. And certainly it appears that he didn't, because he heads across state lines, he's thinking about it, then he turns back around, ditches his phone, winds up back in the Chicago suburbs, winds up getting pulled over. It does seem that once he left Highland Park, his pre-planning had come to a close, and really he was just winging it.
And is there a reason, Josh, that they're saying he turned around, that he decided that if this is what happened, that he decided not to do it?
It's probably the case that law enforcement either knows or has suspicions based on questioning, but they have not said it.
He did dispose of his phone in Madison, the Madison area in Middleton. That phone has since been recovered.
Hey, we heard about, in the aftermath of this, we heard about how different it unfolded from a law enforcement perspective than, say, Uvalde, Texas, right? Police did come running in. They did rush towards the danger. They were very clear in the moment about what they did and did not know. And yet, Josh, at the end of the day, several people are dead. Lots of people have been injured by someone wielding another high-powered rifle. So what would stop this? Like, is it an issue of more preparation? What is it?
Look, Brad, they were prepared. That's the thing. That's the terrible tragedy here.
We heard loud reports, which we perceived as gunfire. Highland Park Police Parade units immediately ran to the plaza area, the source, to locate and identify the source.
The cops were there. The cops were in the parade. The cops were around the parade. The cops were preparing for the parade. Look, we saw the cops. They were wearing their heavy bulletproof vests. There's no amount of preparation that is going to stop a bullet being fired from a high-powered rifle. Now, the Where this could have stopped, Brad, goes back to what was revealed on Tuesday, that there seemed to have been missed signals. And had law enforcement or the mental health community or the gun registration system somehow gotten in the way of this alleged shooter and his ability to purchase weapons, that's where it could have stopped.
There was no new information to establish a clear and present danger, no arrests, no criminal records, no mental health prohibitors, no orders of protection, and no other disqualifying prohibitors, and no firearms restraining.
But frankly, once he was armed, and once the weapon was loaded, and once he was on the roof, there's very little that could have been done to keep it from any casualties, any fatalities.
Then where does this go from here then, Josh? In your mind, as you sort of report this out and as you're talking to law enforcement, what is the most important thing to find out next?
Well, the most important thing that law enforcement wants to know is what motivated him. Is there something in his trail on social media that could be a lesson to law enforcement or the social media companies how to find these people before they are motivated to carry out acts of violence?
His motivation isn't necessarily clear. I don't want to go specifically into what he told investigators. However, he had some type of affinity towards the number 4 and 7, and inverse was 7-4.
And law enforcement is going to want to look at the role of friends, of people who knew him on social media and in real life, and the parents. We know that the father helped him obtain the permit, the card in Illinois that allowed him to get the guns. And so is that process with the family, does that need to be tightened? Do the parents have something to answer for?
There's probably going to be civil litigation. There's probably going to be, and not probably, there is ongoing criminal prosecution and criminal investigation. Issues of culpability, liability, who may have responsibility in certain circumstances are all part and parcel of that process.
The parents have put out a statement, and they are aware of the terrible nature of what happened, and they want to work with law enforcement, they say, and they want to examine the whole issue. Mental health, school, counselors, therapy, and their own role if it needs to be examined. But all of these questions really need to be looked at. And maybe this one winds up being the mass shooting that does enable some material change to take place.
Right, and as this idea was being reported by your team as to, this possible Wisconsin shooting, we were also learning from Richmond, Virginia authorities that they ended up foiling another potential attack on the 4th of July. 2 men arrested on weapons charges. Apparently guns recovered at the scene. All of it came just from a tip from a concerned citizen. That, they say, is all that really stood in the way from this happening in a completely different city with a completely different perpetrator. Josh Margolin, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brad. I appreciate it.
Next up on Start Here, your conversations with your lawyer are privileged, but this guy's the lawyer for the White House, and he's going under oath. We're back in a bit.
With so much at stake in our world right now, we wanted to thank you for your trust and for making ABC News America's #1 news.
And thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues, The Hunt. True crime 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
National parks are incredibly safe places, but crime will happen.
Hey, my wife has fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident.
There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now.
I was shocked.
Something's not right.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart that he did this.
It's the time of suspicion. The ending's really tough.
You don't know whether truth is going to be difficult to find unless you try to find it.
Right now, with so much at stake, Sunday mornings, this is the place. Taking on all the tough questions, straightforward reporting, no spin, no hype, no bull. Thank you for making ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos the #1 Sunday morning news show versus the competition.
Welcome to This Week.
If the House Select Committee on January 6th was trying to capture public imagination from people who thought they had heard it all, well, they've succeeded. Every day has provided new revelations, especially the testimony of the staffer who was with President Trump and his team on the day itself.
We have a breach of the Capitol.
It was unpatriotic. It was un-American. We were watching the Capitol building get defaced over a lie.
But there's one thing that's been kind of missing from all this. If part of the allegation is that President Trump knew what he was doing was fraudulent, knew what he was doing was illegal, and then tried to do it anyway, well, how about hearing from the people charged with making sure the president is acting lawfully at all times? Well, yesterday we learned that the former White House counsel will be appearing before this committee in a deposition. ABC's Catherine Falders has been covering all this. Catherine, who is this, and why does the committee want to talk to him?
Yeah, so Pat Cipollone was the former top lawyer in the White House. He had one of the most senior positions. He was the White House counsel, managing a big office of lawyers inside the White House. Now, look, he's important, and the committee wants to talk to him because, as you know, in the days leading up to January 6th, on January 6th, after January 6th, Pat Cipollone was there until the last day of the administration.
Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, has barely spoken to the president since the riot on Wednesday.
He was, and we reported some of this at the time, constantly advising aides maybe not to be in meetings with the former president. Maybe they would expose themselves legally. He was talking about those theories that the president was floating around at the time that he could overturn the election.
Cipollone said something to the effect of, please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable.
So what the committee hopes to learn more about is what Trump was doing that day, what was happening around the West Wing, perhaps even more important since Trump, as we reported at the time, was in that outer Oval Office watching television. So that's what they hope to learn from him. And we know, Brad, that he was essentially advising Trump and people around him that a lot of these ideas, whether it be seizing voting machines or appointing a special counsel to overturn the election, that he was essentially saying, we can't do this. None of this is legal, including going to the Capitol on January 6th.
But so as a lawyer, though, what if he's going to go into this deposition, which we should say is not televised? This one is not televised. This won't be one of those ones that's videotaped or transcribed, and we might hear about it later. But as a lawyer, what can he say and what can't he say?
He's unlikely to discuss any direct conversations with Trump or meetings that Trump was in specifically, unless Trump has said that he could. That's at least what we're hearing about right now. So you could hear a lot of conversations with Trump. But look, Brad, what he can talk about and what I'm curious and interested in is Mark Meadows.
I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong.
What was Meadows doing? What were his interactions with Meadows and other staffers around the White House? We don't really have answers to that yet. So he's hugely significant in that way. There will be, I'm sure, some attorney-client privilege issues that the committee would have hashed out, or executive privilege, or whatever those types of issues may be. But the reality is, the terms have been agreed to, and he's scheduled tomorrow to sit with the committee.
Well, and so from people within the White House, we'd heard that as these arguments were playing out that you mentioned, the people on Pat Cipollone's side were essentially calling themselves Team Normal. The people who wanted to wipe away these election results, they had deemed Team Crazy. Well, a lot of members of so-called Team Crazy are now being subpoenaed to testify in other court proceedings. What do we know about that?
Yeah, this is interesting. This is the Fulton County investigation in Georgia. Lots of people who you've heard of before, former Trump advisor Jenna Ellis, Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, who you've heard a lot about in the January 6th investigation, and the Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. They have been subpoenaed in this grand jury investigation in Fulton County in Georgia.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes.
They were involved in that infamous call that the former president made to the Georgia Secretary of State, where he told them to find votes. So that's an ongoing investigation in that state as well. Now, it's important to note with Georgia specifically, this grand jury does not have the power to hand down indictments. Its recommendations are then sent to the district attorney, who then has the power to bring charges. So all of these same players, Brad, involved in these parallel and ongoing investigations.
All right, Catherine Falders covering the White House. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brad.
For many American families, money is tighter than it has been in years. So, how would it feel to know that somewhere out there, someone's got money they charged you illegally, and yet, now that you know about it, they refuse to give it back? That is the conflict that's been unfolding between homeowners in Detroit and the local government there that collects their property tax. ABC's Trevor Alt has been reporting this out. And Trevor, these are like the property taxes, people pay on their house, right? The government tells you how much to pay, and then you pay it to them.
Simple as that, yes. Every year, Brad, the local government tells you what your house is valued at. You pay that percentage of the property tax, and that's that. And what we've learned is in Detroit for years, beginning from 2010 to 2016, essentially, as the Great Recession happened and the housing market plummeted, Detroit did not update its assessments, and in doing so, overvalued homes for a huge portion of the people that were living in Detroit, and in turn then overtaxed them to the tune of what some estimate is $600 million in property taxes that should never have been owed.
We find that the burden of these illegally inflated property taxes is being borne on the most vulnerable homeowners, the ones in the lowest valued homes.
So that already is an enormous number. But think about this, Brad. In Detroit, there's 200,000 homes or so, give or take. In that stretch from 2011 to 2015, 1 in 4 homes in Detroit went into foreclosure because they didn't pay their property taxes.
In 2011, myself and my husband were looking for a house to become owners of.
For example, we talked to this woman, Sonia Bonnet, who's now an activist in this cause, advocating for people just like her. So she was making payments on a home with her husband.
So we start fixing it up, and we're starting to get used to it. We get our kids in school over there.
Paying month after month, and those payments on top of covering the home and staying there were supposed to cover the property taxes.
And then one day I get a letter in the mail that says there's a $5,000 tax debt.
Sonia was likely victimized by what's called a quitclaim deed, where the owner before her was not paying property taxes, quickly transferred ownership of the house to her. And she was told by the city, you owe $5,000 in unpaid property taxes for 2 years for a home that the city said was worth $20,000.
So you couldn't afford $6,000?
No, that might as well have been $6 million.
Now, she shouldn't have owed those property taxes to begin with, but if they had assessed the home properly, which they did later, and they cut the value of the home in half, down to about $10,000, she would have owed a couple $1,000s less in property taxes. Her and her husband would have been able to pay that bill, and they would not have been kicked out of their house, which they eventually were in 2017.
And wait, Trevor, the one thing I haven't heard you say yet is like allegedly, or like the homeowners are claiming this. Is the government denying that it overcharged these people?
No, it's kind of staggering, because when you talk about something like this, when you're talking about $600 million, Brad, I mean, usually there are some discrepancies. And while the government won't put an official number on what they overcharged people, they openly say, yeah, this really got away from us, and we charged people too much money.
The reappraisal should have happened in the 2005-2006 timeframe, just as the market was crashing. The city was having trouble keeping public safety officers on the streets and first responders, so there was no $10, $12, $15 million to give to the assessor.
Now, you have to understand, at the time in Detroit, they had about 7 people who were in charge of all of these assessments. They readily admit now, yeah, we got it wrong over and over again. They've taken steps to try to make the assessment process much more accurate now, and they also actively encourage people to come and appeal their home assessments, because they say, we want to get it right.
There's 400,000 properties in the city of Detroit, over 200,000 houses. I would never tell anyone that every single one of them is valued correctly. But that's why we have a review process.
Of course, that doesn't change the fact, Brad, that we're talking about thousands of people who already were overcharged, already lost their homes, and now the fact that they could get a proper assessment does not necessarily make up for the misdeeds of the past.
But then you get your money back, right? Like if the government took too much money, you give them the money, right?
Well, that's the thing. That's when it becomes much more complicated. So in the city of Detroit, according to the city, they say there's a few problems with simply giving them their money back.
The city does not have the money to hand people cash. It's against state law.
They say, number one, state law prevents the government from just writing a check to a person that they owe or giving them tax deductions in the future. They say that is illegal. So they consider it a non-starter.
Wait, it's illegal to give the money back
yes.
that you took already?
Yeah, which they admit. We shouldn't have taken all that money. But they say, according to the law, you can't do it. Putting that even aside, because some activists do dispute that, even if they could, back in 2013, Detroit filed for bankruptcy. You might remember that. It was unprecedented because it was an entire city. They were $18 billion in debt. They filed for bankruptcy, and the city of Detroit lost its ability to self-govern. The state had to run it for several years. Since then, Detroit now can govern itself, but one of the stipulations is that they are not allowed to go $1 over budget. They cannot have a deficit at all. And so if the city were to say, okay, it's legal and we want to pay back the $600 million that we took from people, that $600 million first has to come from somewhere. They need to have it on hand before it can go out. And that means higher property taxes from the people of Detroit. And the people who were overcharged to begin with would end up paying out the debt from the money that was stolen from them.
If you lost your house in 2014, 2015, 2016, you've been struggling to rebuild that wealth, because for most of us, our home is the greatest asset we'll ever own. If you've lost that home, I don't know how to make you whole.
In 2020, there was a proposal in the city to give those people who lost their homes from overassessments priority and discounts to buy homes that are in the Detroit Land Bank Authority. So if they wanted to buy another home that had been foreclosed, they could get a discount, or they could get priority access to city jobs if they were applying for one.
Even when you think, okay, I'll accept the thing that they're offering, it's still that thing in you that's like, they stole from me. Why am I just accepting whatever they can give me?
But they weren't straight up getting their money, and that proposal was voted down by Detroit City Council as critics were saying, this does not go far enough. But in the interim, all of these people who are victimized by this are just sitting there waiting, hoping someday the laws may change and they may get their money back.
I absolutely think the system can change, but I think that like hearts and minds have to change first, of course.
And I asked Sonia if she ever thinks that day is going to come, and she compared it to reparations for slavery. She's like, I think that one day this will be made right, and one day morality will prevail, but I don't know that I'll see it in my lifetime.
And to think about how intergenerational that kind of property wealth can be, how much of an impact that makes on a family and on a community. Trevor Ault reporting from Detroit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brad.
And one last thing. Something that's fundamentally changed over the last couple years is how we order food. It's become more like Amazon delivery, frankly. Instead of calling an individual business for their service, you put in your order on DoorDash or Uber Eats and voila, it appears.
Burgers, tandoori chicken.
Some milk from the store
And let me guess, cookies?
Wow, me hungry.
Yeah.
Well, yesterday, in something that seemed cosmically aligned, Amazon and Grubhub announced they're joining forces. If you have Amazon Prime starting now, Grubhub Plus can be included in the price of your membership. Usually for $10 a month, this program eliminates extra delivery fees. So, good news for Prime members, bad news perhaps for the restaurants that work with them.
You like to use these opportunities
to steamroll the competition.
It's Christian Hetzner. He's a writer for Fortune, and he says, think about it. There's not a whole lot separating Grubhub from Seamless or from Postmates, right? Just like Uber, nothing about the technology stops a Lyft from using the exact same strategy to compete with you. So, if you're Amazon, the only way this little partnership works out for you is if you use the same strategy Amazon did for the last couple decades. Discourage other companies from even daring to do business without you.
So what you're really trying to do is just basically kill all the competition and grow as fast as possible. And, you know, with every heavy growth story, you're obviously going to be in a very difficult position for several years as you're building out this dominance.
Recently, we saw an example of what those growth strategies can look like. On a random Tuesday morning in May, Grubhub told New Yorkers they could get a free lunch. Grubhub would eat the cost, just place an order with any restaurant, they'll have it waiting for you. Problem is, restaurants had no clue this was about to be announced.
In fact, Grubhub was getting 6,000 orders a minute.
It's now 4 o'clock and I ordered my lunch at 12:45. And it's still not here.
They weren't staffed for a huge crush of patrons that arrived clamoring for their orders all of a sudden, so they were upset. But guess who got no business that day? Any restaurant that had not signed a contract with Grubhub. That is the game plan. It's not about to get more stable, says Hetzner. The whole food delivery industry has a problem.
Back in 2020, when we had the pandemic, this was the perfect equity story to take to investors.
As the pandemic began, it seemed like no business could survive without these apps. A European company called Just Eat bought Grubhub in 2020 for $7 billion.
I mean, it's obvious that they overpaid for Grubhub.
Well, now, that company only has $3 billion to their name. They need to sell Grubhub. The only way to convince a buyer to take them on is if they get a ton of new subscribers fast. So hello, Amazon, and goodbye to all those delivery people who just peeled out of their driveways. By the way, Prime members, the other thing to know here is you have to go to Amazon to start this Grubhub membership. It does not start automatically because then you get a mark in your calendar that after 1 year, you automatically start getting charged an extra $10 a month. As always, Start Here is free, so send a rating and review our way if you're liking the show. I'm Brad Milkey. See you tomorrow.